Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to our tech seminar. Our next talk is about exceeding impossible project goals, especially in the project Starbase. Our speaker, Anna Narinen from Frozenbyte, is project lead on this particular game, and also she has very much hands-on on the game design. So please welcome Anna.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be here. I'm here to talk about Starbase today. I'll first tell you a bit about the game itself, so you can get the feel of it. And then the idea is to look back from the beginning of the development, what the project goals were, how we achieved them, how we managed to even improve upon the original goals, and how, as a team and a company, we managed to do that. So first, a bit about me. I joined Frozenbyte back in 2013. First 4 months or so, I actually worked in the QA department, but quite soon I moved to the design part of the team. And my first big project was porting Trine 1 on our new engine, and the project lasted about a year or so. Then I moved on to be the senior gameplay designer on Trine 3, which was all about puzzle design, platforming, enemy design, features, and so on. And finally, I had the lead role in Shadwen, which came out in 2016. And for the past 3 years, I've been working as the project lead on Starbase, which means in practice that I oversee the different design and development processes in the project. I give feedback to designers about their work, and I also do some hands-on game design myself. Before I joined Frozenbyte, I also studied all game development-related subjects in Tampere University of Applied Sciences. I studied game design, project management, and user experience. I also did an exchange year in Salford University, and I got my degree during my first year at Frozenbyte, as I was kind of studying and working at the same time. Then a bit about Frozenbyte. We are an independent game developer based here in Helsinki. The company was founded back in 2001, so the company turns 18 years this year. We are among one of the oldest game companies in Finland. We are best known for the Trine series. Maybe some of you have heard of those games, maybe some of you have even played them. If you haven't, you should try them out. They're very great, especially in co-op. Frozenbyte has always focused on high-end console and PC games, and we have our own in-house engine. We released around 9 different games around the years on 12 or more platforms. It depends kind of how you count them. And currently, the company has 125 employees. So here is a list of the games that we released so far. As you can see, there are a lot of different Trine titles on a lot of different platforms. Yes, we even did make an Android port out of Trine 2. The latest releases were Nine Parchments and Has Been Heroes back in 2017. We didn't actually release anything last year, because we've been busy developing Starbase and Trine 4, which is also coming out later this year. So, let's take a look at Starbase. If after the presentation you want to learn more about the game, you can head to starbasegame.com, but I'll tell you the basics here. The game was announced a few months ago, and it's been around 5 years under development. And the plan is to launch it at Steam Early Access later this year. So what is Starbase actually about? It's a space MMO, and one of the core mechanics is that it has a fully destructible environment. So you can do voxel damage and fracture damage, meaning that either very detailed damage or you can break objects into larger chunks. This applies to everything in the game world. You can destroy any spaceship or space station that you come across in the game if you have the right tools or weapons. It also has a lot of simulation elements. For example, the design of the spaceship, the weight and shape, and the amount and placement of thrusters affects a lot how the ship actually flies in the game. All the parts in the spaceship have their own function, and with the spaceship design, you can affect how well the ship can perform, for example, in space battles, or if you want to focus on hauling cargo from one place to another, you'll have to design the ship differently. As it is an MMO, you can interact with other players online, you can join and create factions. And we hope this to be a very community-driven game. However, if you want to play alone, it should be also entirely possible to enjoy the game by yourself. It's actually been quite interesting after the announcement of the game a few months back. We've been seeing this, people have been joining our Discord community. There is, I think, 12 or 30,000 players there already. It's really fun to actually read the stuff that people are speculating there and how they're anticipating the game, and it's been really great to see the community grow. And it's a space game. Spaceships and space station are a central part of it. So we offer an in-game editor for the players to design their own spaceships and stations. And once you have your ship, you can, of course, explore the universe and gather resources, which you can use to either improve your ship or station, or if you want to make money, you can trade them at space stations, or you can just buy things from one space station and sell them to others. It's very basic space trading mechanic. Okay, so I'll show you the trailer so you can get kind of the feel of the game. Our in-house marketing team made this trailer just before the announcement, and what I'd like to say is that all the footage that you'll see in the trailer is actually captured in-game, and all the players you see running around are actually our own developers who helped to film the trailer. And also the emotes and expressions that the player characters are making are in-game emotes that also the players will be able to make when they're playing the game. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Let's talk a bit about the development of the game. We first started making the game back in 2014. First, it was just a very small team. It was mainly our tech lead trying out the technology, and then a couple of artists doing like concept art for the game. We had to adapt our in-house engine to use voxel technology, as we hadn't used voxels in our games before, and we also ended up adding a completely new renderer to the game at one point of the development, though this was a few years after we started. More developers joined throughout the project when we finished other games in the company, and we also hired a lot of people specifically for Starbase because it is such a massive project compared to others in the company. I think for the past few years we've had around 60 developers working on Starbase in total, and this is like the most ambitious project Frozenbyte has never worked on. We've never put so many resources in one project before. Okay, so let's take a look at what the project goals were and how we ended up achieving them and what we did better than we expected. So even though the development started back in 2014, the project goals were already set back in 2011. Our creative director, who is also the CEO of the company, came up with these kind of loose goals that were setting an outline for the game, but were nothing specific. It wasn't a design document, it was just an outline of the game that he wanted to make. However, the problem was that some employees within the company thought that these goals would be impossible to achieve and didn't want to start working on the project. So because of these doubts, the project was delayed and eventually started back in 2014. There were quite a few goals, but I've chosen 3 specific ones for this presentation that kind of describe the core of the game. So the first one is new dimension in building and disassembling things for spaceships and space stations, and then modeling electricity and data transfer in the game, and then big ships and how the combat works between them. I'll go through these goals and explain what they include, what did we end up adding and improving, and how as a team and as a company we managed to do all this. All right, so about building and disassembling things. Of course, the core of this and the core of the game was that we wanted the game that is made out of voxels and you can destroy anything you see in it. Also, the building aspect was very big, so we wanted that the spaceships and stations would be very detailed and consist from hundreds of individual parts, and you'd be able to replace these parts once they get broken, and also every part would have its own specific function, so it's not just there because it looks pretty. Well, you can do that as well, but they all have their own purpose on the spaceship. And also some, like the generators and thrusters, which are larger machines, are built from many separate parts. Also, everything is bolted together, so you don't just place two parts side by side, but you have to attach them, and if they're not properly attached, they'll fall apart when you attempt to fly the spaceship. And we had, in the beginning, this very defined set of rules that you have the frame of the ship, and then you put outer plates on it, and you have to have a certain amount of bolts that it will stay there. And for example, the generator parts, you'd have to have another certain amount of bolts to be able to attach them together. And yes, the spaceship needed to be built properly, and as warping was the first movement mechanic in the game, if you didn't build it properly, it'd just break apart when you attempt to fly off, or the parts that weren't properly attached would just fall off. And the original goal was to not have any physics in the game, because we already had these plans for voxels and hundreds of different parts per spaceship, so physics just seemed a bit too ambitious for the project. Here is an image of a very early build of the game, and as you can see, the player is cutting through this door with a laser, so we managed to get this voxel destruction in the game quite early on. This is an image of the first spaceship that ever made it into the game, and it was designed, I think, originally by the artists, but it already had the modular built, and you can see like the gray beams there, they are the frame or the backbone of the ship, like the most important part, and all the other parts had to be attached to this frame, otherwise they would fall off. So we had the basics there, but we wanted a lot more. Actually, physics were added quite early on to the game, as we noticed that the new engine can handle them pretty well. This was actually quite interesting because now we could throw objects in the game. We have a space drag, so it won't fly off eventually. It'll eventually slow down and stop. But for example, for building spaceships, this was quite handy. We were building a spaceship together with the design team, and there would be this one guy standing next to a pile of parts. One guy would be at the spaceship, and the guy standing next to the parts could just throw these parts to the other dude, and he could put them on the ship, and then a third guy would come and just bolt them there. So it created this quite interesting co-op element to the game. Also, there was a bit of a problem with the voxels. We had them, and we had the voxel destruction, but even though the voxels were quite small, like 1 centimeter, as reference, the player character is 2 meters tall, you could still see the edges of the voxels, especially on round and slanted shapes. So our programmers created this, what we call a hybrid voxel vertex engine, which was also more efficient, but also made the game look a lot nicer. We also ended up adding the fracture damage system in addition to the voxel damage. And one important point, that was the durability rules for the ships changed. Instead of being predefined rules that were designed by the designers, it became a simulation. So there wasn't no longer a predefined, okay, you need 4 bolts to attach this. Instead, the code would calculate, okay, this part is this big, and it's attached to the frame, so you need this many bolts, and they need to be separated, so you can't just place them all in the one spot. And also now you could attach things to other parts than the frame as well, which made the artist happy because they could now place things on top of the outer plating of the ship, and you could easily decorate it. So here you can see an image. I think this is back from 2014. It's a part of the ship that you saw earlier, and you can see this rough edge on the slanted shape, so you can see the individual voxels there. And this is from new build, so you can see there is a massive difference in how it looks. So now you can see the polygon model, and you don't see the rough edges of the voxels, but you can still do the voxel damage. So if player was to damage this, you'd be able to see the nice model, but also the damage. And here is an example. On the left side, there is voxel damage on a surface of the ship, and on the right side, you can see the fracture damage, which is these big blocks that are detached from the plate. And you can also mix and match these, and they work seamlessly together. So you can see there is some voxel damage that has been done to one of the fractured parts. And now that we had our new simulated durability system, we also added something that we call the durability tool. So I made 2 holes on this ship, and then I'm using the durability tool to check, okay, is my ship intact? What happens if I fly off? And you can see that around the holes there are these red areas, and this means that, okay, there is a problem here. If I went and investigated, it would tell that, okay, this part is broken, or okay, this part is missing a certain amount of bolts, and you have to attach it better or it'll fly off. This actually, well, it was quite needed because it was sometimes hard to tell that where your ship actually took damage, and then when you start flying, it'll accidentally break apart, and you'd be very unhappy because you never knew that it was broken. So then we also, apart from the tech, we did some design improvements. So we had the spaceships, and you could replace the parts, but just replacing them off one by one was a bit clumsy. So if you had a hole there, you had to first detach the bolts, remove the part, find a new part from your inventory, hoping that you actually had one fitting with you, and then you'd have to place it on and bolt it back together. So it took a bit of time, especially if you had large holes, and many of those on your ship. So we added something called the building tool that could be used to fix things easier. So if you had a broken part, you can just use the building tool to fill in back the voxels so the part would be whole again. This, of course, costs materials for the player, so they can't just magically repair everything without any cost. Also, the spaceship that you saw earlier, there was a problem with it. You couldn't really use the parts that the spaceship was built from to create a whole lot of new and different looking ships. So what we ended up doing was trashing that ship completely. It's no longer in the game. And our artists and designers came together and created 250 assets or so that work modularly together. This allows us to now build very different type of looking ships using only a set amount of parts. I think that 250 includes all the inner and outer plating and the beams and so on. And on top of that, there are like decorations like lamps or chairs and furniture and stuff like that. Also, building ships in the first and third person controls was a bit cumbersome, so we decided to add an in-game editor to the game. This has most of the functionality that the developers have in our current editor that the developers use. And the goal is to actually, for the developers to move to using this new editor eventually as well when it's polished enough. So now we have the editor, but still one ship consists of hundreds or even thousands of parts, depending on how large the ship is. And building one of those takes quite a lot of time if you build it part by part. So our designers made these ready-built modules that you can use, for example, these pieces of hallway or like a cockpit or parts of wings that you can use to make a ship a lot faster. So here is a screenshot of the building tool in action. On the left side, there is this broken plate, and on the right side is a whole plate, and in the middle there was a broken plate, but I'm using the building tool to fix it. And here is a screenshot of our in-game editor, and this is for creating different spaceships. So you have all your stuff that you need to create the ship on the left, and then you have undo and stuff like that on the right. And you can also build ships together with your friends. The idea is that the players create kind of the blueprint of the ship in the editor, and once the blueprint is ready, they can use the building tool to actually build it into a physical ship in the game. Sorry about the little black screenshot there, but this is the station version of the editor, so players can also build their own stations. They can actually rent a lot at one of our mega stations and design their own small station within our large station. So you can use these all different station modules on the left to create the type of station you want. And this is our mega station editor. So you can edit and create large stations quite fast. The highlighted part that you can see there is actually around 360 meters per side, and as the player character is 2 meters, you can imagine how big the stations can be. And here's a screenshot of a very basic set of ship modules. Each of those modules has the individual parts, so the damage system is still there, and even if you build the ships from modules, you can still detach the individual parts and replace them with new parts. And there is just a very quick model spaceship that can be built with these. Okay, so next on to modeling electricity and data transfer. This was also a very big goal right from the beginning. And the idea was that all the devices and machines that the players have in the game, they require electricity, and the electricity is generated by generators. And devices would need to be connected to a power source, either a generator or a battery with a cable, and the cables could also transfer data between the devices. And from the beginning, we wanted to have this in-game programming language, now called YOLO, which could be used to execute commands like to open and close doors or to show information. For example, if you're sitting in your cockpit and you want to see how much fuel you have left, you could use YOLO to display that information on your cockpit screens. Here is the very first version of our generator. I think it has 20 different parts or so. The idea was that you'd have to have all the parts there for it to be its most efficient. And if you were missing parts or if the parts started taking damage, the generator would also slowly lose its efficiency until it would break. And here is a very simple setup. There is a battery on the right, and you can see the blue cable that goes to the door, and there's also a button. And if you'd cut that cable, the door would no longer work. So you can imagine in a spaceship, when all the devices are connected together, when all thrusters need power, if the cable gets cut, and you could accidentally lose half the thrusters in the ship, depending on where you place the cable. So you want to keep them in a safe place. And here is an example of the YOLO code. You could also see some of it in the trailer. This is just a very simple example used for a small spaceship to control the thrusters in the ship. So again, we had all the basics there. What did we add and improve? We actually ended up adding a lot more YOLO functionality than we originally planned. It was supposed to be a very simple language. For example, we didn't have support for strings or decimals in the beginning, but we added those. And also, on top of YOLO improvements, we also added a lot of different devices to the game that we didn't even think about, let's say, 4 years back. For example, we added these rails that could be used in factories, so you can place the rails in the ceiling or on the floor, and then attach a tractor beam to those, and they would be able to move objects from one end of the factory hall to another. And we also added robot arms, which could be used, for example, if you want to automatically bolt ship modules together, you could program them to do so. And rangefinders, which tell the distance, and these could be used, for example, with the auto-landing system. So if you want to land your spaceship on an even surface without accidentally crashing it, you can use rangefinders and YOLO to create this landing system. And also transmitters and receivers, which could be used for autopilot, so you can code your ship to automatically fly from one station to another. So we had all this cool stuff, but we also realized that not everyone wants to use YOLO or learn a basics of a programming language to be able to enjoy the game. So now for the most basic ships, it is optional, whereas it in the beginning was supposed to be a part of every function and interaction within the ship. Also, we ended up completely redesigning our generator, so as with the first ship, the old generator went to the trash. Here is a bit more complex YOLO that works together with a few other chips to actually control robot arms, so you can just point at a place, and the robot arms will then be able to bolt on the place you pointed. So you can create these automatically bolting factory lines. And here's one example. So you can see the orange robot arms, they're bolting onto this plate that is moving on the yellow line through the factory hall. And here is the new generator, so it became quite a lot simpler, no longer 20 parts. And each of these parts actually has its own individual purpose. So the green one on the right is the fuel chamber, and there's a fuel rod inside the fuel chamber. The orange one in the middle is the actual generator unit that makes the electricity, and on the left side here you can see the cooling board that is needed, and the cooling cells that are needed to keep the generator from exploding. And on the top there's the socket board, so you can attach cables to it. And you can attach these parts of the generator together, and you can have as many generator units as you want. You can have as many fuel chambers as you want, but you have to be careful, because if you don't have enough cooling, the whole thing might explode. All right, so we came quite far in our electricity and data transfer system, which is also a big part of this, so ships and their combat. This is probably one of the areas where it was developed the most throughout the project, because the original plan was to have a stationary spaceship fights. This means that in a combat situation, you would have two ships side by side, placed stationary, and they would be able to shoot each other, but they wouldn't be able to move around or do any tricks. They'd just be stationary. And the movement in the universe would happen through a warp gate, so you just warp from one place to another instead of being able to freely explore the universe. However, of course, we still wanted that the ship design affects the combat, so of course where you place your turrets would affect where you can shoot, and your devices need to be well protected, so if you place them right next to the outer walls, that would be bad news. And still cutting that one single cable, if you hit the enemy ship in the right spot, could disable a lot of the ship. And after the fights, the players would need to repair the ship, because if you try to warp with the broken ship, it would get even more broken. So this was like the basic concept that we wanted to achieve, that also ties together the assembly of the ships and the electricity. Here is a very early screenshot of two large ships side by side. So this would have been like a basic combat situation. The ships are there, and they'd be able to shoot at each other. And here is the same situation from a bit of different angle. You can see the other ship has taken quite a lot of damage already. And this is the warp gate that was supposed to be the main movement method around the universe. So, what did we end up improving here? So even though the voxel system was cool and the damage system was cool, it would still have been like a dream to have actually the ships fly around instead of being stationary. There was a lot of these discussions inside the team that, can you imagine how cool this would be if you could actually fly around with it? We still thought it was cool, but it would have been so much cooler if we'd been able to do that. So our programmers did their magic. They adjusted the engine and made this very simple test to see what happens if the ships could fly. And it worked. It was a bit laggy at first, and it was a bit shaky at first, but it worked. And the programmers said that, okay, we can do this, we can improve from here, let's keep going. And this was like the single, like very defining point in the project because it changed the nature of the game quite a lot. For example, now that there wasn't warping wasn't the main movement mechanic anymore, we had to come up with whole design for, okay, how do these ships move, how do you control them, and because we wanted the YOLO and data networks to be a big part of it, we started thinking what would be the best way to achieve this. So the way we did it is that now you can place thrusters anywhere on your ship, and it really matters where you place them. For example, if you don't have any thrusters pointing left or right, your ship won't be able to move left or right. And you'd have these levers in your cockpit, which are then wired to this, what we call the flight control unit. There are different types. The cheapest one only has few movement directions, and the most expensive one gives you all the movement directions. And then you can assign the levers to do these movements, and when you pull the lever, then you can tell the main flight computer that, okay, we want to go left, let's use all the thrusters that can make us go left. If you don't have the thrusters, then you don't go anywhere. And we also added elemental damage to the game and a lot of different materials. So this added actually quite a lot of depth. We first had just the idea of, okay, we have this outer plating which is made out of a certain material, and you need the outer plating so you can survive through radiation. And then if you were missing outer plating, your insides, the frame, and the inner plating of the ship would start taking damage. So that was the starting point. We had this outer material and inner material, and we actually expanded quite a lot on that. So for example, I think now we have 20 or so different materials with a lot of different strengths and weaknesses. For example, we can have a material that is very good against heat damage, but is very bad against corrosive damage. We could have material that is good against corrosive damage, but is very bad against collisions, so you don't want to put that on the outer parts of the ship and then crash into something. So this is just a screenshot from the trailer, but of course, as you could see from the trailer, the combat became a lot more interesting now that the ships can actually fly around each other and shoot each other from different directions and not just be positioned side by side. And here is the interface for using the ship controls. So you can also assign any of the levers that you have in your cockpit to certain keys. So you can use your keyboard to control the ship. You can still manually pull the levers with your cursor in the cockpit if you want to, but of course flying with the keyboard is a lot easier. And here is just a quick chart of the materials that are currently or are planned to be in the game. And of course, you get the materials from mining asteroids, and you get certain materials from the outer surface of the asteroid, while the other you can get from the core material. And of course, the asteroid belt has many different kinds of asteroids, so you have to go searching for the more expensive materials. So how did we manage to do all this as a team and as a company? We started with the goals that some employees thought that would be impossible to achieve. We ended up making a completely new version of our engine. We added the new renderer, and also we created a new editor. So also we added quite a lot of features. I guess usually in the game projects you rather cut features off and don't keep adding them throughout the project. So how did we do all this? One important part, of course, of any project is the project practices. And for us, well, you could see the project grew more ambitious over the years. And this was possible because we had very flexible project management. There was no strict management, no strict methods, no waterfall, and no future design. So with this, I mean that we didn't have this massive design document in the beginning of the project, which is good because if we did, we would have ended up throwing half of it away because the game and technology evolved so much. And also, we had no strict schedules. I guess this is a luxury that can be afforded by some indie companies, so that was very good for us, of course. And the monthly goals could change, or they did change, based on what our creative director wanted to try out next. And this often resulted in new technology, and of course, new technology resulted in new features. So the project and the game was growing during the way. when you look at the original project goals, they still outline the game, and we got there and we got everything we wanted, but we just did a lot more than we expected to be doing. And especially in the beginning, the project was a lot about research, what kind of technology we could achieve, and how that technology could be turned into features in the game. Very important thing, a passionate team, of course. We hired, as I said, we hired a lot of new developers to work on this project, and an important part of that hiring process was that they were excited about Starbase, and they wanted to work on this project. And also, inside the company, people are like given this, when a project ends, you can kind of choose what would you want to do next. And programmers achieved a lot of great things. As you could see, a lot of new technology advancements, and this was because we allowed them to break the limits and test what they can do. And designers then were, of course, responsible of creating features that take the most out of these new technology advancements, because the technology wouldn't have been much use if you actually couldn't fully implement it in the game and use it to your advantage. An artist, of course, were responsible for creating new assets that work with the new engine. They hadn't worked with voxels before, so there was all kinds of interesting problems in the beginning. And as we added the new renderer halfway through the project, they also had to adapt to use that. All right, and then I guess this is very specific to Starbase, accepting the impossible, I like to call it, and what we also call it inside the company as a kind of a joke, but it's still true. So the project is so massive that it's impossible for all the developers to try and memorize every single detail of the game. Of course, we have like intro documentation in the company wiki. We have, I think, over 300 pages of information about the different features and how the game works, and a bit about the future. Okay, this is something we are doing next. But it's impossible for the whole team to read those 300 pages and memorize everything. I can't remember everything. And it was up to the creative director to hold the vision together, and of course, everyone in the team is expert in the features that they are making, so they know everything about those. I think the communication between the different feature teams has been very important also. And the thing was that developers had to accept this. They'd had to accept that, okay, we are attempting to do something impossible, and we can't understand everything about it, and okay, that's the thing, let's try and do this. So just kind of get the peace of mind and to be able to work on your own set of features instead of panicking that, okay, this is a massive project, how are we ever going to finish this? Now, if we looked years back, say 2 years, 3 years, 1 year, even 1 year, I don't think we could have believed back then where we are now. All the features, especially the free flying around the space with the spaceships instead of the stationary fights, has been a so big advancement that I don't think anyone saw it coming. I think this quote is quite fitting, that only those who attempt the absurd can achieve the impossible. And for me especially, this project has been, I think, a very once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I've been very happy to be able to work on it. It's been challenging, it's been fun, and I can't wait for the early access launch. All right, so thank you for listening. I hope you got some insight into the project and how we've been able to develop it. As a side note, we are constantly looking for new talent, so if you got interested in the project or a company, do go to frozenbyte.com/jobs. Okay, does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Anna. So I have a mic, please. Here we have.
Hi. So I couldn't stop myself noticing the similarities between your game and this indie game called, what was it? Space Engineers, yeah. You know that, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. But then you told the timeline, and I was like, okay, you just got the same idea about the same time, but when you went in the details of your game, I realized that you have completely different end results. My main question is that the development timeline has been such a long one that it's quite impossible to think that those 4-core, CPUs can handle that sort of a game, regardless of the engine and technology behind it. And between that, or during that development time, the core counts in average computers have risen like quite sharply thanks to the AMD's Ryzen. Has that in any way changed your belief about the project's success, or that you can really do it in the end? Like, did you start in this impossible that, okay, we have to push this technology into its extreme because only we have 4 cores, and then suddenly you realize that, oh, we have all the cores we ever wanted and everybody's going to get them, so it's going to be easier. Did you ever have that moment in your project?
So as I said in the beginning, my background is more in the design and management, but I guess I'll answer this from the perspective that how the advancement of technology has affected the project. So of course, when we started 5 years back, the hardware wasn't as good as it is, and I think that some of the technological advancements that we've been able to make is due because the technology has also evolved throughout the years. But I don't know specifically what areas of the game it has affected, but even now when we were thinking about, okay, so what are the minimum requirements for the game, because we had to put them on the Steam store page because of the early access, so we just put there what our development computers are using now. And we are optimizing the game all the time as well, so it's like really hard to say what the actual requirements will be at the early access launch and later on. But definitely, of course, the better the technology has gotten, the more we've also been able to do for the project.
Thank you, Anna. So, any other questions, comments? Don't be shy. Or was it also super clear? Huh? No? I have one, and then I'll let you be. As also fellow developer, and having this sort of like certain projects that have more flexible schedule, I'm sure, well, pretty much at least in my practice, what we do is that you always have some kind of schedule. I mean, you have some deadline that you will break. That's how it goes. But since this has been a project for about 5 years now, what was the initial idea? How long did you think, or your team thought that this might be? Would it be something, let's say, goal is to do it in 2 years? Or was it from the straight ahead being like, we do it when we do it? What was the approach in that sense? Because you kind of also have to have something to aim for. So if you can tell more about that.
That's a good question. I think in the very beginning, when we just started the research and we look at the project goals, okay, this is the outline, let's try if we can even adapt our engine to do half of this stuff. I think at that point, we had such a small team working on it that we didn't really have any kind of goal. But when we started sizing up the team and more designers joined, then of course we had okay, we'll work on these features and hope that these will be ready in half a year. But as I said, our creative director also would change, okay, I want to focus on these features now because we want to try out this new technology. So it would change. I think I would say within the past 3 years, there's been, of course, as the early access is getting closer and closer, it's been more focused and there have been more immediate goals. But I can't remember when was the first time we were thinking about early access. I think 1.5 years ago or something. We were thinking, could we release it now? Should we release it now? But we wanted to have a proper proof that we can make this game before we presented it to the public. So we thought, okay, we have money in the company, we have the developers, we have time and resources. Okay, so we won't do it now, we won't announce it, let's push it back. So this kind of pushing back has happened over the years. I think past 3 years, 2 years, a couple of times, because we wanted the product to be near to be finished before we even show it to the public. So there have been deadlines, but we've had the freedom to be able to push them back when we realized that, okay, we do need more time and features to be more completed before we want to show this to the public.
Thank you. Any other? No? Thank you, Anna, so much.
Thank you.